Okay, hi guys. Today I'm going to show you how to measure a garment correctly. So this is really great when you have an overseas manufacturer and you're trying to communicate what kind of fit you need in your garment. And if you don't specify these measurements, they're just going to make them up. So it's heaps better if you actually measure something that's very similar to the design that you want and give them as many measurements as possible. And you can always correct them later, but if you give them a guideline, it's going to be heaps easier for them to get a fit that you're really happy with. So the first thing I would actually measure, I've just got a strappy dress that we'll use today. The first thing I would measure is the bust, waist and hip. So the bust is the widest point on the bodice. So you always want to lay your garments nice and flat. And so you'd actually be measuring on the half. So nice and flat. So it's 39.5. You can work in centimetres as well as inches. So that's actually 15.5 inches. So go bust. Now, the waist is actually just under the bust. So the waist point is 36. And the hip is actually, a lot of people think it's the hip bone, but it's actually, there's high hip, which is the hip bone, and then lower hip. For this dress, we can just do lower hip. So that's the widest part. $66. Now what you want to do is measure the distance between the bust, the waist and the hip, because your overseas supplier doesn't know where you're measuring. They don't know if you're measuring here, 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 so they don't know where the 66 needs to be. So I've measured it here, so we're going to measure from the waist down to the hip, and that's 22. So we're going to tell them how to get this measurement here. So that's waist to hip is 22, and the same for the bust to the waist is 12. Just write notes as you go. Now the other thing I would do is I would measure your centre front bodice. So from here to here, so it's 13.5. And then from the top part of the bodice, it's 20 centimetres. And I would also measure the length of the skirt at the centre front. So it's 46 centimetres. And the other thing that's really great to do is measure the side of the garment. So from the underarms down all the way to the hem, 63. Now, what you could do is actually stipulate the length of the panels if your design actually had the panels, and also I would stipulate how many pleats are in here and the height of each pleat, because in your illustration you could have only drawn 6. They're just going to make it up, so you really need to be specific and go, look, I want 30 pleats at 6mm or only 4 pleats. I would actually say this is kind of called bias binding. So I would actually stipulate the width of the bias binding. So if you measure that, it's 2 centimetres or more like 18 mil. Now if you flip over the garment, you can see that there's a zip So always have your garment nice and flat. It's a great idea to even say the zip length, because you don't want it too short and not too long. So that's 25 centimeters. And there's an elastic panel here in this dress with shirring. So you want to kind of say how wide the shirring part is. 7 centimeters. And then I would also say the length of the adjustable strap. So if you start at the front and work your way, 40 centimeters plus this extendable bit, so 46 in total. So I would give them the length fully extended. Other things I would include in your when you're describing it to the manufacturer is the width of the hem. See, this is a very, very small hem. Some garments are going to have a wider hem, like a pair of jeans, for example. So that's only 6 mil, so I'd actually say that. Other things you could say is there's an elastic panel right at the top here with casing. You could say the width of that as well. But all in all, that's how you measure a garment.